Hello, everyone. This is Adrian, and welcome to another episode of Rolling Stories, the HR podcast brought to you by Rolling Arrays. Now, consulting is a profession that often evokes mixed reactions. Some people admire consultants for their expertise, problem solving skills, and ability to deliver results. But other people may view consultants as outsiders, intruders, or even threats to their own job. So, how does being a former consultant shape the way a HR leader approach their role? How does one leverage the consulting skills, mindset to drive change, innovation, and performance in the organization? And also, what are some of the common misconceptions or myths about consultants that one may want to debunk? Joining us today to talk more about this is Mr. Benjamin Festin, a former consultant turned HR leader. He is currently the VP HR and Head of Talent and Learning at SP Group. Hi, Benjamin. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Adrian. Hi, thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome. So to begin with, could you walk us through your career journey? How did that transition from consultant to HR come about?
Right. I think for me personally, it's always been the best way I've described it is a perfect series of accidents and coincidences. So for when I first started, I actually started in executive search, and I'll be perfectly honest, I didn't even understand what executive search meant at the start of my career, and I went, wow, what are we doing? And from that, and then of course, obviously at that time, I was just a junior consultant, so I did a lot of research. And interestingly enough, it may be impossible to think about it now, but at that time, without LinkedIn, we had to do a lot of our own research, a lot of trade secrets, calling and breaking a lot of barriers via the phone and exclusively over the phone. So it was an interesting job, but it also led me to appreciate and understand different industries, because we did search for multiple industries, and I was very interested also in university with doing case studies, and I studied business as well. So my favorite topic was actually management and understanding case studies. So through that, it was kind of a mix, right? Because in executive search, you also have to appreciate the industry with the role. Yeah. So I did that for about 2 years, and then after that, I actually joined Ernst & Young. And another fun fact, which might reveal my age also, I actually applied for the job via the newspaper. Right.
Well, newspaper. What is that?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So what is a newspaper? Right. So I actually applied, on the recruit section, if people can even remember what that was on Straits Times. Yeah. So only because when I saw on the ad as a management consultant, they were looking for people actually with experience in HR, but also having this broad appreciation for businesses and understanding and almost with the promise of being able to solve problems, which was something I always enjoyed. So I thought, hey, why not, right? And I had that little bit of HR sort of experience under my belt, being in search for about 2 years. So fortunately, I actually got the role, and that's how I kind of started my journey. And over the course of time, for the next almost 8 years, then I was in consulting in a few other companies as well. And that was kind of my journey into that, right? But I think after about 8 years, and always consulting for either human capital or change management type projects, I kind of wanted to see what the other side was in-house. So that's when I kind of transited and decided that, hey, why don't I try an in-house role, right? And sometimes you're often challenged, hey, very easy to just give solutions, right? And then you don't have to implement anything, right? So quite typical, right? As what people would say. So I decided to kind of almost stretch myself and challenge myself and say, hey, why don't I try and take an in-house role? And that's how I sort of transited into where I joined actually MediaCorp as initially an org and change person, but over time I think my portfolio also grew to include things like learning and talent management. And from there on, and then that's how I kind of transited. And over the course of the next 10 years almost of my career, that's where I've been as well, and focusing on these kind of topics as well from an in-house capacity. So it's a very interesting journey, and it's almost I wouldn't say it's something that I planned as well, but I somehow managed to marry all my interests in case studies, solving problems, liking people, and that's kind of the confluence lah. And I almost say I'm always very fortunate to kind of land where I landed. So always grateful. Yeah.
Having spoken with many different guests, actually you are one of the majority of them that also did not really plan exactly where they want to head into. I've spoken with another HR guest. He wanted to be a banker, but because of recession at that point in time, he went into HR, and honestly, reluctantly. But after a while, he realized he has expired in terms of age to get back into banking. And he decided to then just double down into HR. And he has become very, very successful. He's in that insurance company for like the past, I think, 12, 14 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
many other different case studies as well. I think it is
Exactly.
really about trusting the process, right? As long as you put in the hard work, you apply the hard work into something that you truly enjoy, that would really help. But
Yeah.
back to, of course, your consulting experience. Now, I want to jump straight in and talk about the elephant in the room. Now, the term consultant can be a mixed bag of reaction. There are the good ones, but primarily I would say most of the time it's the negative one. I wanted to hear from you, since you were a former consultant, how valid are some of all these mixed reactions?
Yeah, I mean the famous line, right? And I think I'm sure everyone has heard the one where we always say we borrow your watch and tell you the time, right? Typically, that's one of my favorite consultant lines, lah. So every time I tell people, oh, I was one time a management consultant. That's the standard joke I get, right? So but actually I always find that that's a very, very big misconception. Of course, it's always about value creation first and foremost. But people always think that way because they end up saying, hey, what do you know about the company, right? And then, you come in for a short stint, maybe perhaps 6, 8 weeks, 12 weeks for a stint, and then you propose some solution, right? So but I really think it's a misconception because till today, I always feel that there is a place for both, right? I think sometimes consultants are brought in and they are valued for a few things. For one, is valued for their independence. A good example I'd like to kind of bring across perhaps is, let's say there was a HR harmonization project that I did once as a consultant. And we were meant to kind of harmonize because they were building a regional HQ here in Singapore, and they were meant to kind of harmonize all the different practices, processes, policies across various organizations rather in the region, right, into one. And then, it also makes it easier to process and everything like that. But you see, if that was done in-house, if I did that in my in-house capacity, of course, do we have the expertise? Probably, right? I can build from different companies and different experiences in-house. But the reality is, if you're trying to harmonize and find the best fit for everyone, would there be a level of independence coming from an in-house perspective? And furthermore, when you look at different organizations from the region, they may have their own agenda. Hey, I want my policies to be geared a certain way, right? This is how it's done in Hong Kong, for example, or this is how it's done in Indonesia. And then as HQ is like, hey, Singapore does it like that. Why don't we do it this way? So I think consultants then are very important and very valuable. You get that independence from them, and they say, hey, look here, from a very objective view, this is what you'll get your best bang out of your buck for example, right? And if we streamline it this way, or we do it that way, then that's the better thing to do. And the other thing I think consultants bring in is often best practice. So that's the value, because being a consultant, for example, you go through many clients and many different customers, which also gives you different perspectives in terms of how one has done it that way. And sometimes that same solution may not work necessarily for another organization. So that perspective is very important. And I think lastly, like I mentioned earlier, the independence and objectivity is very important to the solution, because it's very hard to be objective, right? But as a consultant, it's different. I just come in, parachute in, I listen to the different stakeholder perspectives. And then after that, I say, hey, no agenda, don't care about your politics, but here's the solution, and that's the best way forward, right? So I think there's always a space for consultants, and it's a misconception. And if done right, I think there's a lot of value as well.
Since there seems to be so many positives looking at consultants from an outside lens, do you have any opinion on why then did all this perception come about?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few reasons. I mean, I think if you ask me, one, of course, it also depends on the quality or like rather the value that's created, right? So I think sometimes when they come in, you could be just, okay, let's give you the cookie cutter solution, like I mentioned, right? So not being able to sort of find, what the organization is really looking for. And sometimes it's the depth of which the solution is done at. So what I mean by that is, were enough engagements done with stakeholders, right? Did you engage the right stakeholders? So all that is really through the skill and the value of the consultant and the organization, right? To be able to kind of suss out that particular thing. If it's very surface level, then, it's like, come in, okay, I meet the boss, hey, what does the boss want? Okay, that's what he wants. Okay, that's what we give you, and then not stopping to think, hey, whatever solution that you are implementing, will cut across many layers, right? And understanding the organization in the sense that this is how they're structured, and whatever solution you give, who will it impact, right? And if there are any changes perhaps from your solution, which is quite likely most times, who does it impact and what will that turn out to be? And making sure that you engage those people. But if you don't do that, and as I said, I just talked to the paymaster who invariably will be the CEO or someone. And then, of course, then down the line, the people who say, hey, you go and engage this consultant, right? I mean, the CEO will be very happy. He'll get what he wants, clearly, right? But down the line, when the solution is actually implemented, and that's where the rubber hits the road, right? And then they will realize, hey, you see, go and engage this consultant, and he doesn't spend so much money, then how come it's, still like that, right? So that's the reaction, right? And I think that's to the broader organization, the wider organization, and then they feel let down, So I think that is the ripple effect, right, throughout the organization. And they say, you see, next time I won't really trust these consultants again, right? And you kind of have that view on the table. So if you ask me, I think that's where these kind of misconceptions are brought about, Yeah.
So it's really a case of, I guess, maybe to some extent a few black sheeps, but
Yeah.
by and large, of course, there are a lot of merit in engaging consultant. Now, before I touch on some of the other questions regarding skill sets as well as when to engage consultants and all, since you were a former consultant, are there some specific, you mentioned best practices earlier on, could you just distill that a little bit? Specifically, what kind of skill set, transferable skills that you brought over to your current role as a HR lead, which may have been something that you had the luxury to bring across because you were a former consultant?
Yeah, I think actually that's why I always when you asked me earlier about my career, I think that's where the perfect coincidence comes about for me, right? And the nice accident, as I call it, because there's so many transferable skills as a consultant into the HR field. Of course, because I was also consulting from a human capital HR lens, then of course there are naturally some of that theoretical aspects of HR, right, and understanding that. But on that same token, as a consultant, that objectivity that comes about is one, and then also looking at it from a multitude of angles whenever you look at any issue or problem. Typically, I think if you started from HR, and no discredit to anyone, I think if you start in HR, you think very HR. You think, this is how it's done. And you don't actually, sometimes you don't stop to think, is there another way of looking at the problem? But I think having started as a consultant first, it's afforded me that opportunity to say, hey, we keep looking at it from this angle. Shouldn't we look at it from the other way around, right? Or rather than we were saying, okay, just looking at it from what leadership wants, but what would actually impact the employee sometimes? Is that the right thing to do? And I think that part for me is very important, right? Yeah, and I must say from a consulting perspective as well, because we're expected to do a lot in a very short period of time, right? Our engagement time is so short. The natural thing for me that I felt was valuable was just the corporate toolbox was very well formed after my consulting journey. And what I mean by that is very basic things. Things which are now seem so basic, but then when I started my career 18 years ago, wasn't as apparent, right? And this, I think, even as basic as data analysis and just managing your Excel spreadsheets and learning how to kind of craft narratives, right? Because I think about 20 years ago, when there wasn't so much data, I think that's where work has changed so much now, right? You have so much data, and in the past, it's almost a bit more knee-jerk, and the data is not as available. So some of the decisions that you make as leaders, I can imagine, would be more just a sense of the organization. They have that pulse, right? But now with the data, then comes the analysis, and then also comes with all the analysis, what is the narrative? So, but as a consultant, you're forced to do that because you have to present your proposal, engage stakeholders, convince them, and even if you're part of the implementation, for instance, you have to then maybe even manage the change, for example. And so the other piece about change management is something that I feel was very important, which I brought across to my corporate career. Because I think typical HR changes really cut to the bone, right? I think whether it's policies, performance, bonus, discussions, a lot of that. And if anything tweaks, right, it affects a lot of people. So how do you then look at it, and how do you properly manage change for people, right? So that part I think was very important, and I felt that was very valuable for me, and I brought that as well So it's quite a few things if you ask me. Yeah. So I must say it was really helpful. And in fact, when people ask me sometimes for career advice, people who are graduating, the first thing I often say is, if you have the opportunity and it's in your inclination, try and get yourself, a role as a consultant, even as a junior consultant. It's a wonderful experience for me, and I think it really helped me shape my career and really helped me so much. Yeah, right now.
And on the flip side, are there things within the HR space that consultant can learn from HR people who has been HR since day one? Are there things that, because they are often going around companies, right?
Yeah.
Would there be an instance where the things that they see may not be that deep, may not be that sophisticated enough, because touch and go, you look at a project, 3 months, you move on to another project.
You're right.
Are there certain shortcomings in this area?
Yeah, I would say so as well, right? I mean, of course, I've talked a lot about the consulting piece and how that's been good for me. But I think from a corporate side of it, and now being also in-house, so literally I can cut my career almost in half right now at this juncture, right? Actually, I think I passed that hurdle. I think I've done more corporate than I've done consulting already. But that said, I think now that I can look at it, I think the other side of it, I must say, is that when you are in-house, there is a benefit and understanding what the HR sensibilities are. And being in-house, I think you have an appreciation of the pulse of the organization. What's the real grapevine? What are the thoughts? Because as a consultant, that objectivity, which while valued and appreciated, if you need to look at a solution for a very long, when you look at things for the longer term, then that grapevine, that understanding and appreciation of the ground is important. There's little networks, right? There are people where they're the leaders. So you talk to the leaders, but who are those people who are influential? We try to do that in consulting as well, where we try and find, change agents and who are these people, right? But in such a short span of time, if you want to have the real pulse, that's when being in-house and knowing who these people are is very important. So I know of programs in the various organizations I work for, where sometimes we don't even just get the opinion of the leaders. Of course you do. But these certain individuals, these are very vocal. He will surely tell you what's going on. There's these guys, right? And then they could be, they're not very senior people, but their values are so important. Or rather, their views are so important. And that one person is so influential that he can turn the tide or she can turn the tide for you, when you're proposing something or you're promoting a new program. So is that part of it that I feel being in-house is very important, and navigating the organization, which as a consultant, you try you probably ask your stakeholders, but that's their lens as well, right? But when you're in-house and you have that depth, then the appreciation is naturally a lot more richer. Yeah. So I think definitely there are both sides to that coin.
So the other thing I'd be interested to learn from you is in terms of what kind of situation may call for the engagement of a consultant. I have spoken with some HR people, especially from larger companies. It appears every time they hit a roadblock, the natural answer is hire consultant.
Yes.
Problem A, hire consultant. Problem B, hire consultant. But is that the reality? Should that be the case every time you hit a roadblock, and perhaps a roadblock that is outside of your standard playbook? You just go straight to a consultant. Are there instances where actually going through a consultant may not be the best first step?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think there are many instances where oftentimes, I think the worst time to call a consultant is when you don't really know what is the problem, unless you're calling them in to diagnose for you, which is also, I don't think, ideal, right? So oftentimes they think it's a catch-all, right? They will know best, which is not entirely true, right? And I think sometimes, especially for organizations which are not as aware, or I almost call it escapism. They rather, they don't want to look inward first. They rather just say, hey, let's pass the buck, and then I've got the money, let's pay for someone to go do it for me. But I think sometimes scoping the problem out first before you engage them is very important. So an example, I'm trying to think of a good example, but okay, so maybe another way of looking at it is, if I'm looking for someone to do job evaluation, for example, definitely I can't do that internally. I can have my own benchmarks, I can have my own qualifications around what I think this job is worth, right? But that's it. Then at these kind of junctures and moments, it's good to bring a consultant in, someone who has industry benchmarks, someone who knows the size of the jobs, someone who has a very dedicated scientific way of looking at competencies, for example. So all these things, yes, it's very straightforward. Call the consultant. That's the right time to call, right? But the wrong time to call is when, you just hit, oh, wow, engagement very low. That kind of thing. Why? And instead of, just looking a bit deeper, running a few, be it focus groups internally first, getting some kind of root causes, or at least trying to dig a bit deeper first before you engage the consultant. I think those are things where it's not always wise to get them in at that point. I think it's always finding out what are a few of those root causes first, rather than looking at symptoms. It's because the symptom actually to me is engagement score is poor. You know what I mean? That's a symptom. Oh, it's a bad sign. Something is wrong. Yeah, but what is wrong, right? So it's defining what is wrong. And if there are problems and pockets which then lend itself to the value of a consultant, I think that's the point where you call, right? So yeah, that to me is more fundamental, because sometimes when you bring them in and you don't know what the problem is, they'll come in and they'll work with you, and then they'll slowly diagnose with you, right, as well. And is that the best use of each other's time? Is my question. Yeah, so that, I guess from my take and my perspective, yeah, that I think is not the best time to call them. Yeah, so often to dig deeper first is my own suggestion, I feel. Yeah.
I really second what you mentioned about escapism. I was working in a previous company where we were having attrition issue, obviously engagement issue as well. And the natural inclination from the senior management is to, let's engage a consultant, do diagnostic, this and that. Eventually that was done. The report was presented to the board. And one of the savvy board members is like, actually you only have 40 over people. Why don't you just go and talk to them? And that never occurred to a senior manager. Just talk to them like a human being, talk to them one-to-one, what is going on. So they went one big round to try to solve that problem, which eventually, from what I heard, was never solved. So I think it might be, like you said, trying to just to something which may be a bit too much, but again, you want to escape the entire thing. Now, the other thing that I would want to also understand from you is, because your consulting days were quite some time back, and as you pointed out earlier on, you first started finding job in the newspaper, right?
Yeah.
And back then, technology was at infant stage, I would say. And you earlier also mentioned about data analytics. How does that play a part in today's context? Because many times in perhaps maybe or even a decade ago, without data on hand, obviously, sometimes you don't even know how to diagnose the problem. But right now, big companies can just get data analytics, people analytics too. Would that somewhat dilute the necessity of a consultant, since I already have all the data, I know what I need to tweak in order to have some impact? Or would that actually just change the way consultants deliver their work or their scope?
Yeah, I mean, cuts both ways, right? I think you're absolutely right. I think the availability of data and now the access to being able to analyze that data corporate, within, in-house almost, I don't think it devalues, but it then makes or ensures that I think the consultants then have to be even sharper, right? So beyond looking at that, then what are we looking at beyond just suggesting things that are seen from the data? Then it really looks at, they have to then bring in big data, for instance, trends from the industry, right? And best practices and leading practices. So it's almost taking a now beyond just what I can see, but a futuristic view as well. So I think there's that consulting has to then take that tone for me, right? Because if not, then then I can truly tell you I'm giving you my watch to tell me the time, right? Because I can just give you the data, then you go ahead, right? But where we can actually do that, right? And I think that's the difference as well. But I'm quite sure it has evolved from a consulting angle as well. So I think that's to me the major change. And it's interesting how work has evolved with the technology, as you rightly mentioned. So when I first started, having ERP is a big deal, man. I can apply leave online, we're all done, right? And people don't even imagine that, right? Or they think about it as very second nature. You mean I can't do this on my phone? And I'm actually shocked at how fast it has gone, right? And I think I'm very fortunate to be the age that I am, because I got that experience as well from both sides. Yeah, but I'm very hung up on how we started at ERP first as just a tool to administer but it has evolved so much, right? And then the next wave was getting data and then it basically giving you some trends. Wow, I can do graphs on, we can do graphs and we can show 3-year analysis and trends. And then after that, as data and more data gets collected, right? Then people realize, oh my goodness, I've got now 10, 20, 15 years of data on hand. What do I do with that, right? And that's why I think that's the part where it's exciting now, where all that predictive stuff comes in, right? In the past, I can't predict, only 3 years of data. How can I predict that someone will leave, right? But after now, with 20 years of data, looking at different people, habits, and how people go about their day and their work, this is a sign. Next 6 months, this guy will quit, right? Almost they can tell, right? From your engagements, from your interactions, there's so many data points. So very exciting time, as well. And like you rightly mentioned, with companies and AI being able to do that in-house for in-house customers, right? If you buy the right products, then the question is, where does consultants then fit in? So I suspect they have to then come in and say, looking at the predictive analytics, what can I do about it? How do we address earlier, right? And so the pace will only get faster, I suspect. Yeah.
It's like the old school doctor when they don't have access to MRI, X-ray. They will base on whatever they can lah. Your pulse lah, your heartbeat lah,
Correct.
your blood pressure lah. But now with all this invasive and non-invasive tool and equipment, they are able to better diagnose and see whether you may have a lump here, some grey spot there. But still, they perform the same job, but much more accurately.
Yeah.
So I'd like to move on to the last segment, and this is particularly useful for listeners who may be on the fence or maybe close to selecting or identifying consultants for whatever problem statement they may have in the company. What are some of the common cut-across criteria or things that they should be looking out for?
I think for me, generally, of course, brand names are important. I'm not going to doubt that for a second, right? And not just because of the brand name, but I think along comes with the rigor, the experience, and also a lot of the data, and of course a lot of the what I call the resources and the knowledge that they bring about, right? Because the one thing that consultants, at least the bigger houses, as I call them, do is that they do a lot of their own research and a lot of their own thought pieces and thought leadership, which I think as an in-house person, let's be honest, with the day-to-day activities that go on, I don't have time to go and find out what's the next big thing lah. Let me solve today's problem, right? And that's where I think if you're going to find someone who wants to bring across thought leadership, at least within the organization, or give you leading edge practices, then these big names then sort of are able to do that. So I definitely would lean towards someone who has a lot of subject matter expertise in that area, whatever that may be, or whatever problem that may be. That's one big thing. And also a lot of it is down to, I think also invariably, I think personal relationships, especially when you've had experiences working with other consultants as well, and whether or not what are their references like, right? So I think another thing that I typically ask for when I go and engage consultants is references. Of course, like I mentioned, the first thing first is make sure you know what your problem is lah. And then once you've done that, then when you go engage a consultant, or at least go talk to a few of them when you're deciding on who to engage, you can then ask them for whether it's references and tell them, hey, you kind of know what the issue is. I've kind of put it out quite plainly to you. Are you able to give me similar references of work you've done with other clients, right? Better yet, in my industry. Better yet, in really specifically down to the same moment, the same problem as I have. Are you able to do that? And I think the ones who can show you very concrete sort of examples and practices and how they are able to solve those problems for other clients, I think then you feel a lot safer sleeping at night, right? And you won't keep awake thinking, hey, are they trying to pull a fast one on me, right? Yeah, so I think those are the things that I look for, references, and also a lot of the thought leadership, and whether or not you can buy into that thought leadership. Because the other thing I feel when it comes back to, just circling back to thought leadership, sometimes you read some of it, you will also ask yourself, hey, do I really believe in what they're saying or not, right? It's as basic as that, right? And sometimes you may even feel, wow, sounds a bit far-fetched, doesn't sound like me. Yeah, and I think the last thing is knowing yourself, right? It's the same thing, right? You know what kind of an organization you are, and not denying the fact that you are still you, right? And an organization is still an organization. It's not going to change overnight either. So being mindful of the kind of organization you are and looking at the kind of thought leadership and the kind of options on the table, even if they propose those solutions and options, do you think you'll be able to implement it successfully? It sounds good. A lot of times, I mean, I'm sure it will sound very good, but are we mature enough sometimes? It's about maturity of an organization. Are we mature enough to handle or not? They can give you a very good solution, but you think possible to implement, and how can we do that? So if they're able to answer these questions as well, I think, of course, pose it back to the consultant, right? Hey, a traditional organization, do you think we can manage this kind of thing? Those are interesting questions to ask as well.
Calls for as much as the big brand names would be important because, like you said, the rigor, the best practices, etc. It is also important to be discerning, and also importantly to find a compatible consultant. If you are so used to jogging pace and the consultant expect you to run a sprint or even run a marathon, you can never catch up. You'll be out of breath. You will be burnt out ultimately. And then of course that may fit into why there are some mixed reaction to the perception of consultants. It could have all begun because the qualifying criteria was not ideal. So I hope with that our listeners will have a better sense of what to do when they approach their next consultant or when they do their next queue for a good consultant to come into play. These are some of the things that you should take note from. And with that, thank you so much, Benjamin, for coming onto the show. For people who is keen to learn more from you or to even just connect with you and to have a chat with you, where can they find you?
They can just find me on LinkedIn. I think my name, I think quite easy to find me. So you can just look for me on LinkedIn and be happy to connect as well.
Awesome.
Thank
you so much,
Adrian.
Benjamin, for coming on the show.
Thank you.